I hate New Year's Eve. Every year on this night, the anomaly comes back. It first appeared in the sewers of my hometown 5 years ago. The only hints we had of its existence were 2 dismembered teenagers and 1 young girl who had been traumatized into permanent silence. At the time, disturbing as the event was, it was hard for the police to justify spending resources on kids that had been deemed undesirables. The questions focused on what the 3 had been doing in the sewers on New Year's Eve, not on who or what had killed the 2 boys, and the terrified mute girl couldn't answer them in either case. We didn't have much to do in my town other than drink, so our debates at the bar went in circles before fading over the next few months. We were collectively just about to forget about the whole thing when the next New Year's Eve rolled around. The night celebrations were rowdy, sure, but slightly overshadowed. More than a few people had theorized there might be a serial killer who had chosen that night annually for his ritual. We all kept a nervous eye on the shadowed distances outside the reach of street lamps and porch lights. Just after midnight, screams echoed out from a back lot behind the old hardware store. A tremendous burst of drunk, angry, and protective men surged from the Main Street bars, myself among them. We'd amped up all night to potentially mass mob a serial killer, but none of us were prepared for what we saw. 4 limbs, a torso, and a head lay scattered around the lot, but not in even pieces. Some tremendous force had sliced them to bits. Worse, the same mute girl from the year before sat huddled behind a dumpster, crying and covered in a sopping wave of blood. Harold, our oldest homeless man, had been murdered, and that girl had become the primary suspect. The police took her and brutally interrogated her. Our town was simultaneously silent and full of whispered gossip the entire time. Nobody knew whether to feel bad for her or whether to demand she be treated more fairly. If she had killed those people that way, she was totally insane, so I fought down my usual urge toward fairness and stood by while they continued hurting her. We all did. Apparently, after 4 days, she finally cracked and told them what she had seen both New Year's Eves. We could only guess at this, though, because the chief of police left the station with a haggard look of suspicion and fear and without a word. The other cops escorted the girl to the psych ward of our local hospital and left her there indefinitely. They looked for a hypothesized serial killer for a few months, but neither scene held any forensic evidence. They were forced to give up. Not that it mattered. The next New Year's Eve, they were all killed just after midnight. A veritable cyclone of gore and grated chunks exploded across Main Street. I was sitting in Roddy's pub with the other guys when the window suddenly went dark red with blood like rain. The thump scared the living daylights out of us, and we ran to the door when we realized all the windows were opaque. I can't describe the scene outside. Suffice it to say, the sewer drains nearly overflowed. Our entire police force, several doctors, and numerous patients from the psych ward were later pieced together out of the morass. Sitting dead center was the same girl, knees curled up, arms over her head, as foot-deep blood swirled past her. Yet again, she had been the only survivor. Only this time, we knew we were not dealing with a serial killer. Something far worse was happening. The girl, of course, had more or less lost her mind. She was also still drugged up from the ward and told us everything in a stunned haze. I truly wish she hadn't. The nature of the anomaly was such that we could not speak to the media or ask for help from outside sources. We simply wouldn't be believed, and there'd be more questions than answers, getting us all in deeper trouble. Though the mess was horrendous, we cleaned up the street as best we could and gave them all good Christian burials. Those hours of picking up body parts with my numb, garbage bag-gloved hands in the cold light of New Year's Day rank among the second worst of my life. The first worst hours came next New Year's Eve. We were all in it now, a town secret among the men. The anomaly was going to come back and we had to be ready. Part of me hoped it wouldn't return, but the rest of me knew, with a sick feeling, that it would. It had been growing bolder each year, starting underground and then slowly moving into places that were increasingly public. If we didn't stop it, Lord knew where it would go next. Last New Year's Eve, we sat waiting in our houses. There was no drinking, as we would have to be sharp. There was no gathering, because it would find us. There were no last-minute goodbyes or phone calls. We didn't intend to die. It came between one blink and the next just before midnight, and just as the poor girl had said. She was my first sight. This would be her 4th time through nightmare. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She seemed completely resigned to her fate. Recovering from the blurry, odd feeling of being taken, I looked around at the others. There were the 43 men we'd expected, the girl, and several wives and children. My heart sank as I saw them. Someone had screwed up. Beyond our scattered group, strange ivory tiles radiated out to meet smooth alabaster walls that arced around us in an unbroken circle. The ceiling, just reachable by a jump, held the same tiled pattern. I took this in quickly, then focused on the anomaly at our center. It was as she'd said. 6 thin black circles rotated on an axis to form the framework of a sphere shape. Each circle seemed to be made of impossibly thin material, like a fine wire honed into razor blade sharpness in every dimension. An ivory sphere hovered inside it, blank. There was very little delay for getting our bearings. The ivory sphere lit blue while people were still cussing and looking at each other. The girls screamed to make them pay attention, and we looked down at our feet. A large number of the semicircular tiles on the floor had turned blue. I touched one, and it rose about a foot up and turned green. Getting the idea, everyone else started running around and hitting the blue tiles, raising them up and turning them green while the sphere began humming louder. As it reached a crescendo, we realized that all the tiles had been activated, but we weren't sure if that was what we were supposed to do. Apparently it wasn't, because the sphere reached a high note, went silent, and altered one of its surrounding black circles. The circle rotated until it was flat in the air and then began expanding rapidly. People screamed, but we all ducked in time. We'd all seen what this thing had done to everyone else, and we weren't about to get caught off guard. The worst injury was the removal of a small tuft of hair from old Benson's mop. We crouched, relieved, until the lights on the floor changed and the humming began rising again. All these factors and certain details of the room I can't relate to you told us the terrible truth. It was a puzzle, exactly as the girl had told us, a child's puzzle, built by someone or something so exotically different from us that we found it murderous rather than simple. There were no instructions, the same way we don't put instructions on, say, a plastic tower with several brightly colored concentric rings of different sizes. The child was simply expected to try different permutations and have fun with no danger involved. But our ring tower toy would seem very different to, say, a creature lethally allergic to plastic. It might ask, why would anyone make this? What monsters would create such a torture device? And we asked those questions too, as we failed to figure out the addition of red to the tiles. The second black circle around the sphere split into numerous vertical lines that began spiraling out through the room. Mercifully, these were slow, and only a single hand was lost among the crowd. One of the wives screamed in pain, but her husband was there to bandage her stump, stem the bleeding, and grab her loose hand for possible reattachment, assuming we got out of this in time. The ceiling! The ceiling tiles were separate objects from the tiles below them. As the sphere began humming again, we all realized that at the same time. Jumping up, we hit red tiles, which turned blue and lowered. Below, we hit green tiles, which rose further and turned back to blue. The new color, yellow, only turned white when struck. The men threw out numerous theories. Did it have something to do with primary colors? Were we supposed to make patterns? The 2 black waves had halted at the extremities of the circular room. Should we try to take advantage of the new small gaps in the sphere's defense and destroy it directly? Whatever we were doing wasn't working. The girl warned us that the deadly black energy lines could come back from the outer walls, so we all managed to duck as the first ring shot inwards and rejoined the sphere's outer shell. We all thought we were actually getting somewhere. We all thought we could figure it out. Maybe we could have, given enough time. But when we looked around for the fourth change, we saw nothing new. Mary Baker stepped on a white tile, and it rose and turned blue. The game hadn't been designed for us. There was only one chilling conclusion, something that not even the thrice surviving girl had known. The puzzle involved colors we couldn't see. It hadn't been built for our eyes. Collective hysterical screaming drowned out everything else. Our plans and strategies suddenly seemed stupid and ill-fated. We literally had no way to win. Every single person in that strange otherworldly trap was going to die. Except there was one other catch. A sort of fail-safe. I suspected it was the way the girl had survived 3 times already, and I was certain she'd kept it to herself on purpose. It was why I had brought a knife and a gun, both hidden in my clothes. None of us intended to die, but I intended to die the least. The game let out in the middle of deep backcountry woods. Initially, I thought this meant the Anomaly was simply moving on a straight line to nowhere. Later, I would realize that it was actually halfway to the state capital. There was no gore explosion this time. The black lines of energy hadn't torn apart nearly as many victims as before. The blood and organs and intestines were still in the dead, held mostly together by their empty vessels. As the only survivor, exhausted and covered in blood myself, I walked straight home and took a shower. My first thought was not to tell anyone. I could never explain the disappearance of all those people, and certainly not a clearing in the woods filled with dozens of bodies. You see, though the Anomaly was built as some sort of puzzle for a child from a species unlike anything we can imagine, it was designed to be a multiplayer competition. The game automatically ends when only one participant is left. I kept this burden, this nightmare, trauma, and guilt to myself for an entire year. Tonight I speak. Maybe I've lost my mind. I did think I could live with this and keep the secret to myself, just as the girl thought she could. She only cracked once the first time and told Harold, the homeless man. The police beat it out of her and sent her to an asylum. The cops, the doctors, and the other patients paid the price. We men heard it from her, and some of us told our wives and children, consigning them to death. That's another complication of being from a totally different culture than the Anomaly. Just talking about it acts as an invitation to the yearly game. And we just don't know how to turn that invitation off. It might be as simple as a spoken phrase or a mental rejection in a particular manner unknown to us, or it might be something that it requires organs or perceptions we don't have. In any case, this year, tonight, I speak because I have no idea what might happen if I'm the only player. I tell myself that we can figure out the puzzle if we have enough people, enough smart people, enough different people, that maybe someone has an inspiration or maybe someone has eyes that can detect the unseen colors. But to tell the truth, I want as many people as possible because I'm just scared. Scared and sorry. Happy New Year's. See you at midnight.